we were covering everything from China and Mongolia to Vanuatu and Kiribati. So as you can imagine, urbanization in China and urbanization in Vanuatu are totally different processes. They have nothing to do with each other. Anyway, I'll try to give you a few ideas about the work that I've done, and not so much the work that I've done, but the context of urbanization. First, the presentation is divided into two main parts. One is, if you want an overview of urbanization in Asia, and then the other is, I've picked a few issues that I recently have done some work on with Oxfam, and so I'm going into more details in some other issues. Okay, so to talk about urbanization, as I said, it's extremely difficult, but it's also conceptually very difficult. Because there are processes that are purely urban. When you talk about low-cost housing, for example, when you talk about economies of agglomeration, these are purely urban issues. But the point is that the urban also can function as the arena where non-urban issues or national issues or including international issues can play out. So in the way that they manifest themselves, it's adapted to the urban setting. The typical case is politics. Politics tend to be in most countries, it's a national issue, but the way that it plays out, it tends to be against an urban setting. So the factors, the way that, it's the same set of factors, but the way that they interrelate and the way that they manifest themselves is unique to the urban setting. And by the way, I wasn't aware that most of you apparently are doing some kind of work in politics, and so I don't touch much on that dimension, but we can discuss that at the end. Okay, so what is it that we mean when we talk about urbanization? What is it that urbanization implies? First of all, there is a physical demographic dimension. Okay, urbanization is an increase in the number of cities, an increase in the density of settlements, an increase in the land area covered by settlements that we define as urban. Okay, so that's one dimension. That's looking at cities as in a sense in isolation. Urbanization also implies a gradual increase in the complexity of the systems of cities. And this is becoming more and more relevant now. In a later slide, I'll mention some of these issues. Because at least at the national level, cities are related to each other. Transport, commerce, administrative arrangements, etc. So there is a system of cities. This can go across borders also. Places that are near the border, Taipei in Cambodia, you have Baru in Singapore. So it can go, there are very strong links between cities that create a system. One, in a sense, relatively recent issue, in terms of cities, relatively recent is, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years, is this with urbanization has come an increased differentiation between the functions that cities form. Not all cities function in the same way. Not all have the same kind of economic structure. Not all have the same kind of demographic composition, etc. So the second thing that urbanization implies is this increased complexity in the system of cities. And then finally, years ago, somebody that lived in a small rural town had a completely different cultural profile from somebody that lived in a capital city. That is not the case anymore. Patterns of consumption, cultural values, political attitude, positions and attitudes, they are completely dominated by the cities. Because cities are the seats of power. Cities are the seats of political actors, at least the heavy ones. And so, by now, basically, this researcher in Singapore, he talks about the urbanized rural, in the sense of saying that without even moving location, as individuals, they if you want, their profile is urban because what their aspirations are urban, what the services that they demand are what equivalent to the urban services. So these are things that I think it's important to keep in mind, that you can approach this from. There are other things that obviously come to the organization, but I thought that these were three perspectives that are relevant. Okay, so why does urbanization happen? 9 out of every 10 people, including researchers, policymakers, practitioners, will tell you that urbanization happens because people migrate from rural to urban areas. Well, guess what? Not anymore. A lot, you'll see the reasons a little bit later, but there was a study around 2001, I think. I think it was a global study. It was not an Asia. UNDP was involved with it. And it's very difficult to find figures because it's very difficult to track people and how many people move to which place and fertility rates, etc., etc. But they basically estimated that around 60% of urbanization happens because of natural growth. That is, urban people having children, basically. It's not this idea that these tsunamis of people move from the rural area constantly to the urban areas. That is not the case. So natural growth is one key component. That doesn't mean that rural-urban migration is irrelevant. No, it is very relevant because it's still happening. What has happened, what is happening more recently is that you cannot talk only about rural-urban migration. You need to talk about internal mobility within a country. Because the traditional view that there was a continuum in the migration, somebody from a farm would move into a rural village or a small town and then move to a secondary city and then eventually end on in the capital, is not valid anymore. That doesn't hold anymore. People jump steps There are people that go from the farm to the capital. But much more interesting, inter-urban mobility has increased drastically. I saw this was, again, a long time ago. I remember seeing a study on Thailand from NESB where they found out that the biggest movement of people, the biggest internal migration happened between secondary cities between the north and the south. And they simply skip Bangkok altogether, and then they move from all these other smaller cities. So, internal migration, which includes rural urban, but is also interstate migration, is a major factor in what drives urbanization. International migration. I think it's pretty obvious that by now, one of the markers of development is international migration. We'll go a little bit on that later on. But basically, a low-skilled professionals also moving a lot from cities to cities. So international migration is another key factor that drives urbanization. Reclassification, I mean, the first three are basically, if you want to call it, natural processes. Reclassification is an intentional process. And that happens is when governments decide to reclassify certain areas, when you have expansion of an urban agglomeration, and then for administrative purposes, you then, let's say, a district that was outside the city originally, you reclassify it as being part of the city. So that is, in most countries in Asia, has happened and continues happening constantly with the creation of new provinces, new districts, new metropolitan areas. So that's another element that drives urbanization. Depending on the country and depending on the conditions, two other elements that have come to the attention of practitioners and policymakers are the movement of people because of disaster, natural disaster, climate change. The biggest one, I mean, when we talk about disaster, we're talking about the typhoon Nargis in Myanmar, or the tsunami, but you also have things like, because of climate change, areas that are not cannot be productive anymore. The land is not productive. People are forced to move into. They tend to move into towns. They tend not to move into rural areas. And conflict, obviously. In the past, Cambodia, Vietnam, Timor-Leste, Sri Lanka, all these countries had the conflict issue was an important element for people moving to the city. Okay? Okay, so what is the pace of urbanization in Asia? It's high. It's quite high. As you can see, it has had periods of ups and downs, but basically Asia continues to have the highest rate of urbanization in the world. Of course, the issue again, like I was saying before, is that, yeah, if you have China and India, and a little bit of an increase of the urban population in those countries across the index, the rate totally out of whack. So, But the fact remains is that for Asia, urbanization is a fact of life. These are processes that are happening, that we're not going back. It is going to continue, at least for the foreseeable future. Some countries are going to get to a point where they're going to stabilize the rate of urbanization. Some other countries will continue urbanizing because there's still a lot of room for that. Now, and this has to do with the issue of natural growth and the basic urbanization. The amazing thing about the urbanization in Asia is the scale. Is how many millions of people live in urban areas. So if you have 4 billion people, these are thousands of people, okay? So basically, no, what is it? Yeah. So if you have this, I don't know, billions of people living in urban areas, this is where the natural growth then, even if it's small, it spurs very large amounts of urbanization. Because the scale in Asia, it's like nothing that the world has seen. We're talking about more than 60%, whatever, of the urban population of the world is in Asia. So the issues are magnified because the scale is so large. And this is what makes it so difficult to work on urbanization here, because things that, for example, in Latin America, where I come from, certain analysis, certain perspective, you would not take into consideration because the effect would be so negligible. In Asia, you have to consider it because 0.1% of the urban population is a huge amount of people. So that's one of the features, the most difficult to deal with when you talk about urbanization. Now, most people, again, like the same thing that we were talking about with what was the urban growth, what generates urban growth, natural growth or rural population. Most people that work on urbanization and work on urban issues, and particularly the policymakers, they're totally, when they think about urbanization and when they think about urbanization, they think about the megacities. The ones with the red background are megacities, expected for 2030. So you can see how Asia has gone from having, in the 1990s, like 5 to probably having, in 2030, having 25 megacities. That's unprecedented in history. And it presents a very unique challenge. Okay? So, Shanghai and Calcutta, and these are the places that come to their mind. However, here's where the really urban is. This is a distribution of urban population by size of the city. The red one is cities that are less than 500,000 people. The yellow one is between 500,000 and 1 million. So it turns out that even now, more than 50% of the urban population does not live in megacities. they live in actually very small cities. Cities of 500,000 people. So, this is urban. When we talk about urbanization in Asia, this is how urbanization looks like in Asia. This, by the way, all this data that I'm using is from the World Urbanization Prospects 2014 edition that came out last year. Okay? So, this sort of like makes you pause for a second when you're talking about urbanization, the role of urban areas, and the role of cities. It makes you rethink a little bit, because we probably have been barking at the wrong tree for a very long time. Because everybody is talking about Bangkok, or Bangkok is not yet a mega city, so it's over 10 million. So Bangkok is close, it's 9.5 million or something like that. But even then, that's the cities that everybody talks about when they talk about urbanization. When we shouldn't be talking about that. We should be talking about the other cities. The others are the ones that need attention. The smaller cities are the ones that need attention. Okay? So, and like I say, Asia is so varied. There are so many different countries with so many different conditions that there is not one single urban storyline in Asia. Here is grouped by sub-region: East Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. But if you then take each of those and break it into the countries that are within each sub-region, you see even more of different stories. This is urbanization. This is the rate of urbanization. So you have East Asia with very high levels of urbanization because of the weight of China, obviously. Okay? But you have, for example, Central Asia. It's not this. Where's the thing? It's not this big. Central Asia, which is Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, etc., actually went into negative. This is negative. -0.5 and -1. To reinforce that point, there are cities that are shrinking in Asia. This is millions of people that these cities lost. Okay? So, we're talking about very serious decrease. You may have read about the closed cities in China, but those were cities that were planned and created, and people didn't come. But a lot of these cities are very well-established cities that between 2000 and 2014, they lost population. So basically, when you're talking about urbanization, we're talking about the urban future that we have. You need to be careful. Different cities, they have different processes, have different paths. And there are a lot of different reasons why a city can shrink. You can have a change in, for example, locations of manufacturing industries into another location. You can have cities that are so close to a larger city that then people start migrating into the neighboring city. You can have aging population. There are a number of reasons that can happen. But cities, it's not true that cities continue growing all the time or stabilize. They actually can shrink. Okay? Having said that, there is absolutely no doubt that cities have been the engines of economic growth in most of Asia. The opportunity that cities provide for economies of agglomeration, for efficient delivery of services, for not only social services but also financial services, etc., for development of infrastructure, that basically had made cities engines of economic growth. Cities, this is referring to cities. The relation between urbanization and economic growth is not completely clear yet. There seems the evidence and the analysis suggests that it varies from place to place, and it's not very sure which one causes what. Because a city an urban area may become a self-fulfilling promise in the sense that because it has this economies of agglomeration, it produces economic growth, and then because it has economic growth, then these economies of agglomeration can be more efficient. So it's a self-fulfilling kind of situation. So there is absolutely no doubt that cities have played a very important role in the reduction of poverty in Asia, in the economic development of many countries in Asia, and also in Asia as a region and globally. There are cities that their own GDP is bigger than the GDP of some countries. So, and here are some of the figures. I mean, if you look at for example, the relation between the population share and the GDP share, it's quite amazing that you see something like in Southeast Asia, the population share of cities is 21%, but it's 48% of the GDP. So it's different. The economic systems that we have in this region are completely anchored on cities. Okay. And like I said, they have played a very important role in reducing poverty. So if you see, I mean, and unfortunately for this, what happens is that we have comparable years for everybody. But this is the percentage of urban population under the poverty line. So you see how it has decreased drastically. So cities have played an important, have made it easy to lift people out of poverty through services, jobs, both in the formal and the informal sector, etc., etc., etc. And there is, I don't know, no, it's clear, yes. And also, the middle class has emerged in Asia, basically in urban areas. In most countries, when we talk about middle class, we talk about urban middle class. The distribution within countries, that's a different story, between the different cities, etc. But these figures are quite interesting. When you think about, I don't know, something like obviously China where you know, the share of the middle class in the population went by 61%. This is again 1990 to 2014, the period. The same with the Philippines. You have 12%, Laos 28%, Thailand 17%. And the one on the right is the millions of people that are now considered to be middle class that were added. So these are very large figures. And this is important because then this means that there is higher savings. I mean, from the economic point of view, there is higher savings when you have larger middle class. You have expansion of consumption. You have not only in volume but also in differentiation. So you can have a much more differentiated market, etc., etc. So the cities have again helped the economic development of much of this country. Having said that, not everybody has been part of this development, and cities have a downside. One of them is people living in slums. One indication is people living in slums. In Bangladesh, for example, 70% of the urban population lives in slums. In Thailand, the only figure that we have is for 2005, in this case. There have been people that didn't win from being in the city, from what the city brought. Okay? This, again, inadequate housing, people that live in houses that are not considered to be, this is not, usually it's not a global definition, it's a definition by the country itself. So, there is living in an inadequate house it's not necessarily living in a slum, because it could be a house in an area that is not a slum. It often includes slums, but it can be more than that. So again, not everybody is winning. There are losers in terms of urbanization and cities. Now, the other issue that now is, the last, 4 or 5 years is everybody's talking about is the issue of inequality. And urban areas in Asia are very, the levels of inequality are very high. And a Gini coefficient of 0.4 is considered to be unequal. Anything below that is kind of okay, acceptable. Anything from 0.4 upward is considered to be too much. Cities are not homogeneous formations where people have the same opportunities. Levels of inequality are quite high. A lot of this data need to be unpacked because it's very tricky to find specific data for specific areas, etc. But as you can see, for example, Chiang Mai is 0.58, and Kuala Lumpur is 0.41, Colombo is 0.46. So you have cities that at first sight look like economically very dynamic, but again, there's some people that are losing on this. Okay, so what is that? What is the current situation? The current situation is that most of the models and most of the theories that we had and most of the policies that we had in the past for dealing with cities don't work anymore. Cities, the old theory, the old approach for cities was to look at the city almost as a self-contained entity with an industrial sector and a service sector and etc. That's not the case anymore. Globalization, need for competition, that means need for collaboration, cluster cities, etc. These models don't work anymore. Okay. Issues like climate change force the emergence of views that take into consideration a lot more factors than what we usually deal with when we talk about urbanization. So that is another component that now we need to look at a much more global thing, the dimension, much more global approaches. And like I said, I mean, cities now have to look at the relations to smaller cities and then to the relation to bigger cities or global cities. They are not isolated entities anymore. So